This videocast is brought to you by Intervals, a robust agency management tool with a proven way to track your time, manage your work, and have your projects succeed. Go to myintervals.com to learn more. Welcome to the DPM videocast, where Kelly and I give our 5 cents on all things digital project management. I'm Ben Aston, founder of the Digital Project Manager.
And I'm Kelly.
And today we want to talk about how we manage multiple projects. How do you do it? How many should you manage? How do you do it? What are the tips and tricks that you need to know to manage multiple projects? So Kelly, the $1 million question that everyone wants to know the answer to is, how many projects should a project manager manage at the same time? Is it only one? Is it 100? Is it somewhere in between? How many are you managing right now?
Right now, I am managing 3 projects for one account. And actually, that is the least I've ever managed, but this is the busiest I've ever been. So I think this goes to show that it's not about the number. It's about, just like you touched on, the complexity, the size of team, the different maybe vendors and stakeholders that you're dealing with. So, so much goes into the answer for that. I've said it before that I could work on one project and I could fill my plate, because it's just how much you're able to put into it, how much budget you have, first of all. But if you just had one project, you could put attention into constantly managing it, reaching out to see how things are internally, checking with the team. Now, would that be fun or productive? Not necessarily, but I think at the same time, you could have 20 or 30 projects. It wouldn't be done with much quality, because you're putting such little time to each of those, depending on what the size of them are and what the scope of them are. So.
Yeah. So I think there's some different things that we need to consider when we're answering this question, and Kelly's touched on them. Yeah, the first thing is size. Like, is this a big project? Is this a small project? How long does it last for? Is it a really long timeline? So size, complexity, is it a complex project? Is it something that you've done before and so it's really simple and doesn't really need much managing? Or is it something a bit more innovative that actually requires more input because the deliverables are maybe less well defined? Also thinking about what phase of the project you're in. At the beginning of projects, when we're initiating and kicking things off, things are more complex. When we're closing a project and trying to get it through QA and live, it's also more complex. Sometimes in the middle, sometimes it requires less management, as people are just more clearly working on the tasks that are pretty well defined. So the phase of the project is important as well. Also, another thing is the support you have. So some projects, you might have project coordinators working with you. You might be co-managing the project with another project manager. So the support that you have is important as well. So it depends is the answer. But Kelly, if you were to give a number and tell us how many projects should a project manager manage, give us a number or an equation. We just want to know, how many projects can a project manager manage? Tell us.
Right. I think my sweet spot has been between, if I am working on build projects, right, site builds, where there is the discovery through the launch, you have the QA, you have everything in there, the development. I think that my sweet spot is about 5 to 7 projects. And I say that because it depends too if it's under the same account, right? You might have different builds under the same company, but if these are totally different companies and brands, that's a lot to keep track of. It's a lot of people to keep track of. So although I have one account and 3 projects right now, I do have a couple different teams, but there's some overlap. So it is easier for me to keep track of the different teams, but the size of the projects are what makes it more complicated. So I would say if these are different projects across different client teams, different brands, and as long as there's not too much overlap with the discoveries and the QA, those really complicated phases, then 5 to 7 would be my sweet spot of how many projects are a good number to manage.
Yeah, and so if I was going to choose a number, I would also say 5 projects is my number that I would choose. And the reason, my rationale for that, is that normally we'd estimate project manager time to be about 20% of the resources time. So supposing you've got someone resourced for a project for 10 hours, the project management time required to manage that person, if you've got a resource working for 10 hours, is 2 hours. So if we look at kind of like how much resources we can conceivably manage then, well, if we have 20% times 5 people, that would be 100% of our time. So I think 5 projects is about what you can manage if you've got 5 people working on 5 different projects full time. So I hope that makes sense, but I would go with the number 5. I think that's a good number to go with. But Kelly, let's talk about some of the problems that we face managing multiple projects. What do you find? Why is it difficult? Why is it so hard for us to manage multiple projects?
Oh gosh, I think the number one reason and challenge for me is having a challenge with the timeline or resource constraint, right? I think that is absolutely the most painful and consistent challenge I see no matter where I go. And so when you have a resource constraint on one project, you can't necessarily convey that to the client if it's not their project that the constraint, you know what I mean? So it's hard to say, oh, this is held back because something else came up with this project that you truly don't care about. So really finessing that messaging and being able to be the coordinator of that, or work with your traffic coordinator or resource planner to make that work. I think that is the biggest and most painful challenge. Otherwise, I think it is truly making clients, kind of in that same vein, clients feeling special, like they are the only ones. It is nice to have clients when they have agency background or have worked in that get it, as long as you are empathetic to them and not take advantage of that they realize. So I think for me, that is my biggest challenge. And then also if resources are not single threaded on their work, so they have multiple projects they're working on and you don't have dedicated teams to each of them, that's hard because then you have to start balancing and prioritizing. Not necessarily that the client says I'm most important, but you have to make the judgment.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about there is, prioritization is a really difficult thing, prioritizing between different projects. And that means in terms of who gets what resources, what project is more important, how do you allocate your time? I think that is really tricky. You're talking about overloading as well, sometimes when, clients aren't feeling the love. So why is it hard to manage multiple projects? Well, it's prioritizing properly. It's us feeling overloaded and maybe letting things slip. But also the third thing that I want to add is planning is difficult as well. Like when we're trying to manage multiple work streams, multiple resources, multiple dependencies, it can be really difficult to plan this out properly in a way that makes sense. So I want to know, what are your hacks? Like, how do you manage multiple projects? What are some of the secrets or the things that you found really helpful that enable you to manage multiple projects or work streams more effectively? What's worked for you?
Right. I think the biggest part is communication internally, right? So you might have all of your stuff together for your project plans and communicating to your client, but make sure you're talking to other project managers or other people in your team or your company that may or may not have an effect on your projects and you theirs. I think another piece would be when you are communicating maybe flags to the client of timeline pushes or what is really resource constraints, that you're telling them and making sure they understand that timeline is not a one-to-one push, because they might be a day late on providing copy deck for something. It doesn't mean that we're just going to be a day late in our timeline, that it might have a bigger impact because of other projects you are managing. So I think finessing the messaging and being proactive wherever you can, not reactive.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I would say that it enables us to be more proactive is planning properly at the beginning of the project. So when we're managing multiple projects, it's easier to be proactive when we've thought about that timeline. How do these projects fit together? How do the resources fit together? We can be more proactive if we understand how that fit works or doesn't work. And then I think it's really important to have this consolidated view of all the projects. So having one timeline in one place, one in another, resource plans in different places, it's really hard to manage things and to plan it properly if we haven't got this consolidated view of all of our projects together. And if you're looking for a tool to help you do that, look for a project portfolio management tool that will help you plan and get this consolidated view much better. And I think the thing to look out for when you're doing the planning is overlapping milestones. Like what you don't want to do is have deadlines or deliverables around the same kind of time, because that will make things really crunchy with how you're managing your project. So create a really good plan, a good estimate, a really good timeline that considers the dependencies, the different projects, Make sure you've got that consolidated view of the projects. Watch out for things overlapping too much. And then, I mean, you talked about this, Kelly, but knowing your priorities. And I think that comes in terms of being able to rank your projects. We've actually got to decide in our head, what is priority 1, what's priority 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if there is a fight, you know, internally in our own head or with other PMs, we need to have this big picture view of what's important and what's not. So being able to rank the projects is really important. Someone has to make that call. And I think the third thing I'd say is really important to track progress. I think, you know, I touched on this a second ago, that one of the things that can happen when we're overloaded is that we can let things slip. So I think it's really important for us to know where things are at. So don't skip doing your status reports, doing your reconciliations. We've got to know where projects are at. And then that'll help us prioritize our time better. So I wonder what you think. How many projects do you manage? Is it too many? Are you managing too many projects, too few? How do you work out how many projects is a good number to manage? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more and get ahead in your work, get ahead in your career, come and join our tribe with DPM membership. You can head to the digitalprojectmanager.com/membership. And what you'll find there is a whole load of workshops that have been pre-recorded, monthly, fresh, ongoing training with immediate templates. We've got a whole template library that you can get access to, a Slack team, a whole bunch of other resources. So head to the digitalprojectmanager.com/membership. Come and join us, join the discussion. We'd love to have you with us. But until next time, thanks for watching.